So first of all, for those of you watching and listening, I want you just got to meet Matt and listen to him. This is one of the most creative people in our space. That's why I think he has this cool brand, Cultures Creative. That's his personal brand. And then Sunpoint, and Sunpoint has an E. Don't forget that is his RIA, where he's a managing director. But we were just having a brief introductory conversation, and it occurred to me that this man probably knows every finance podcast out there. And so, Matt, I want to start this whole conversation with saying, how in the world do you cover all this stuff?
How do you digest everything?
Are you familiar with this thing called ADHD? Have you heard of this thing?
No, not at all. Not me.
Not you. Certainly neither of you. Just unbridled attention deficit disorder. And I learned a long time ago, and like the phone is the worst enemy in the world for most people, but if you weaponize anything correctly, you can do amazing things with it. Are either of you the people who like you start the book and you have to finish the book? Have either of you ever suffered from that affliction?
Like you have to finish the book?
Yeah, like you feel like guilty, like if you don't get to the end of the book.
Never.
I was that person.
I do have that obsession, but I'm getting away with it, learning from people like our friend Dave Noddick, who is an inveterate starter and not finisher of books and will only finish the ones that really matter. But I'm currently working my way through the Harry Potter series again, which, by the way, has quite a bit of relevance to today's political environment, but that's a whole nother conversation. And I am
welcome to the conversation again, ADHD.
I'm not sleeping at night.
Yes.
So you got to figure out how to drink from the fire hose in some orderly way. And that is where, my wife will talk about how crazy I am with this stuff, but it's just, I will drink from the fire hose in the podcast feed. I am way oversubscribed to stuff. Same thing on YouTube, same thing and everything else. And then I will literally just go until the thing catches my attention that day. And that means I fall into weird ruts and patterns. And it also means I have very broad ranging interests, as you probably know. So I will go wherever that curiosity pulls at me long enough to keep me there and focused. And that's just the way I cover as much ground as I cover.
So every day could be different. You don't have a specific set of podcasts you have to get to every day.
So I used to be like that, and I was a religious listener to these things. Mm-hmm. And I think that came from I was an early I was an iPod adopter who then discovered the podcasts. And I discovered the podcast because NPR Music started they were like, oh, if you listen to it on the podcast. So I would have to take the iPod, plug it into the computer, go to their website, like track down the thing. And I remember being like, oh my God, they did, before Black Keys got famous. It's like they have a Black Keys concert and a small interview at the 930 Club in DC. And like, here it is on this podcast. And once a week or a couple times a week, I'd go in and I'd plug the iPod in, I'd download a couple of them and delete the old ones and find stuff. And that was discovering the NPR offshoots, like Econ Talk and some of that stuff started back in that era. And that was just the beginning of doing that. As soon as it came on the smartphone and now you could start subscribing, that was when I started to realize there's no way I can keep on top of this. Yeah. I can't listen to all these things. But what happens if I subscribe to all these things and more wherever I'm curious, or just look up, hey, who's talking to this person when they're out on the book tour or whatever. And then you start to find all these other cool little corners and stuff. And now I literally will just look at this is why I love Spotify. I switched to them for just my podcasts, keep all the music in Apple Music because, again, I'm a crazy person. And on that, though, you can just click and save episodes. So my new episodes, I will regularly scroll, see whatever the hell is on there. And then when I'm going, I really want to listen to something specific, I go into the ones that I've saved. And even that, it's an overwhelming amount. But I just scroll and I'm like, oh, you know what? I've been really meaning to listen to this interview or, try the telepathy tapes and be like, I don't want to listen to that, but let me go back to Skeptic's Guide to the Universe and see what they're saying about the telepathy tapes and stuff like that.
Okay. So on that note, 30 seconds, if you can do this in 30 seconds, I want you to give me a rundown of your day. Like when you wake up in the morning, do you just like hit the ground, like throwing your AirPods in and like running down is it just a mad dash in order to get all of life in for you?
This is funny because I think my wife and I had this conversation this morning, me coming back from business trip. So I've actually gotten good at, I try not to look at a screen or put my iPods in right when I get up. I actually try to have a stretch of time. And I also had kind of a profound moment talking to this guy, Mark McCartney, a couple months ago for Just Press Record. And we were talking about just being present. And I was saying how much I've noticed my dog knows when I'm not being present. And now we have 2 dogs. So walking the dog, if he sees me reach for that AirPod case, he's like, like this guy is not going to let me explore. Yeah. When I want to take that weird left turn or whatever, and he's like, oh, that's really interesting. You know, what Mark and Jess are talking about this week, he's going to pull out the thing. So I was like, I got to totally knock that off. So I try not to do that for the first chunk of my day, but then absolutely once, the coffee is hitting and whatever, I try to at least put something that's going to just set me off for the day and get me running. But again, it could literally be anything. And then on weekends and stuff, when I'm doing chores, or this is how it started. Like when you're doing laundry or you're doing dishes, anything you can be passive and consume something like this, just throw something on unless you need to be alone with your thoughts,
So now we know that Matt's version of 30 seconds is about 90 seconds, but okay. You said a little earlier, Matt, you discussed patterns. It seems pretty clear that pattern matching is a thing for you. First of all, how did you discover that? And then how do you actually use that skill?
So first I asked if you heard of this little thing called ADHD. Now I'll ask if have you heard of this little thing called therapy? Have you discovered therapy?
No. I don't. I just take drugs. Therapy is no fun.
That's fine. Pattern matching, I've you have this like love-hate relationship or whatever else, but you understand, or at least for me, like I understand now from a very young age, pattern matching to me is how do you take 2 things together, either to make peace or make people smile or just get the room oriented in the right direction. And since I was a little kid with 2 young parents and growing up with three boys in the household, I'm the oldest. So all the things that come with being the oldest in a house of 3 boys, you just start to figure out, how do I put 2 disparate things together to help baby brother stop crying, keep mom from being stressed out, and then take all that out into the world? Somewhere along the way, very, very young, I discovered one great way to make everybody in the room happy and peaceful is to put guitars in everybody's hand and sing a little song and have a good hang and a good party. And I've got pictures of me at 3 years old at the New Year's Eve parties with my parents and all their siblings and hanging out with guitars and singing. And there's me in the middle of the circle with the plastic guitar, basically taking in that lesson and learning pattern matching.
Yeah, that's very okay. So I'm gonna turn the conversation a bit into something maybe a little bit more of a tougher question. And this can be for either of you. ADHD is an interesting, wonderful affliction in some ways, because it can pull you into some really cool, nuanced behaviors like that, like pattern matching, that others wouldn't have been able to discover, manipulate, bring together. And also at the same time, it can create a lot of ripples in a world that others, waves, let's call them, that other people just have a difficult time managing. And what, as you kind of look back over your life, and I think the great thing about being in your 40s is you're starting to figure out who you are and why that's a good thing, instead of who you are and why you're trying to improve on that. You're starting to kind of accept, I was made for these reasons, and I'm starting to figure out that they can do good in the world. So if you can kind of draw a line through maybe that ADHD, maybe some of those, the 2 sides of that coin, and pull yourself through. Because I love that you brought it out from the beginning, obviously. And I agree with you. I think you should call it a superpower now. Did you always call it a superpower? When did you figure out it could be your superpower? Maybe reach back before that. Did you have some struggles with it along the way?
So unregulated ADHD is absolutely it's anxiety. It is genuine anxiety and can be a near disorder. Now I have to say too, I'm not like I am self-diagnosed ADHD. I'm using this term in a non-clinical way. That's
Oh,
just
Ned Hallowell would agree with you. I promise. I promise. And so would any decent psychiatrist.
so would any decent psychiatrist. And I think I grew up, so in my family too, this was, so in the 80s, you know, in my almost mid 40s now here, in the 80s, there weren't like, we still had ADD and then ADHD. And I had a brother, my middle brother, Tourette syndrome, diagnosed with all these things. And so that was a big thing because he had a lot of energy in his version of it. I had a lot of anxiety in my version of it. And then my younger brother has a totally other story with the way he did it. They both got diagnosed with stuff. I was just, you're the oldest, keep this in line.
Deal with it.
No discredit to my parents. It was just the presenting problems. Yeah, it's Civil War triage all the way around when you're raising 3 kids. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
You know, oh, you just lost an arm, but it stopped bleeding. Well, he's got gangrene. We got to go solve that problem. So that unmitigated anxiety that can come from it is when that curiosity is getting capped in various ways. And so I learned from a young age how to target that into stuff. Like I played guitar from a very young age. I got very interested in doing stuff like that. I also got very interested in anything that could be an independent streak for me, because, you know, you're living in a house with a bunch of other crazy people, and then you're going to school with crazy people and all the stuff that goes on. So I learned how to get really focused on the good side of ADHD, which is what pulls your curiosity in. And for me, for music, instruments, stuff like that, that was the place where I could go close the door or be in a corner of a room and it would be like, oh yeah, like leave Matt alone. Let me do that. Also very related for me personally is the introversion stuff. Like Susan Cain's book was a huge eye opener to me when I read that. It was like, okay, now I actually get why I can be on a stage or do something like this and get a lot of energy, but then also be totally exhausted by a networking event or something.
Yeah. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that, it's called The Power of Quiet, and it's an unbelievably good book. Especially if you're an ADHD introvert. Not that I would know anything about that. To me, Jess, the answer to your question is ADHD was a huge problem until I was about 45 or so.
Really? What happened at 45?
Because I went to see Ned Hallowell came to speak at a leadership event at my son's school, and he was on his initial book tour. And people who've watched a couple episodes have heard this story, but you haven't, so I'm going to tell it. So I'm sitting in the back of the room, listening to him describe the diagnosis, and I just started crying. And that's not, first of all, part of my personality. I didn't grow up in a household where crying was.
You got to bottle that stuff up, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
What are you doing? Spraying that perfume out in the world?
Yeah, no kidding. But in any case, it was the realization that I don't have a character flaw. My brain just works differently. And that's when I actually went and got diagnosed. I wanted to confirm my self-diagnosis. And that was the change. And I mean, I quit Accenture. I started, what's now our RIA. I completely changed careers. And it was then through, over the last 4 or 5 years, I'm like, this really is a superpower when it's harnessed. When it's not, I'm like a Jewish space laser.
That's a technical term.
Anyway, I'm very active politically. You'll find out about me eventually. But to steer this back to the topic at hand, I believe you're at a big firm, Merrill, if I understand that correctly. And now, obviously, you're managing director at Sunpoint. How did that? Well, I want to back up even further. How did you get to be an advisor and why? And then what caused you to get out of the big firm environment?
All right. So I'll give you checkpoints and you tell me anything that you want me to drill in on this. Because I think this is important. And from doing this, nobody's path is linear, and it's a mistake when we track them as linear.
That's why we do this.
Yeah.
And extra financial advisor type terms. Like you need to understand standard deviation and volatility, because somebody might have a really interesting upward sloping path, but then you realize the extreme vol it took to get there.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm obsessed and trying to become a music person in the late 90s, early 2000s, like even went to school for it. and was working actively in the field in all sorts of ways. I really, really wanted to get to recording studios. Now, you might have heard of this thing that was happening in the late 90s and early 2000s that was called the internet. Perhaps you're familiar. The internet shows up and starts disrupting everything, the advent of the personal computer. It basically changes the entire recording industry from the inside out, because one part piracy, another part, now nobody needs a recording studio anymore, so you can do it at home. And I walk directly into the teeth of this thing going, here's the people before me who told me you could climb this ladder and do this stuff. And I watched all the stuff that I had started to build up with networks and everything else just crumble to the ground all around me. And like any responsible, 22-year-old with grand ambitions, I assumed it was all me. I assumed like this was my chaos. I was literally...
That's also ADHD at work, folks. That is ADHD at work right there.
You can't piece it together. You can't figure out why other people are figuring it out and you're not. And it just turns you into this complete ball of anxiety. So I'll tell this just because I think you'll appreciate this. So I'm working in this recording studio. I'm literally running this studio. My college internship, the guy I'm working for, gets offered, crazy story, to basically get together with this band that he worked with in the 80s that went on to become big and then blew up. This guy finishes off basically launching the Spice Girls and saying, I want to get my favorite band ever back together, travels the country. That little band that he wanted to put back together was called the Pixies. He puts the Pixies back together. I'm interning for the guy who basically was the sound and lights guy for the Pixies way back when, and then Nirvana and U2 and all this other great stuff too. And he basically turns to me and he's like, you're the only intern I've ever had who, vacuums the carpets at the end of the session and everything too. If I go on tour for the next year and a half, possibly 2 years, can you run the whole operation for me? So I'm, a senior in college and basically getting handed the keys to run this business for this guy on top of all the other things I'm doing because ADHD. So I'm working in the studio. The internet's disrupting everything. I'm recording just to make the bills and like cover rent for, me and everything else. I'm recording the 18th horrible rap demo of some like local New England person. And the line that broke me. So this guy had 2 lines. The one line, fine, is not great, but it's funny. And then there was the line that broke me. The line that was funny was he said, I've got more hose in the back than a fire truck. I was like, that's good. That's good. But then the line that breaks me is he says, I'll shoot you in the calves like Cleveland. And I don't know if you that thing, the Lewis Black thing about like where aneurysms come from is when a thought gets in your head and doesn't go out the other side. And he's in the line and the lady's like, if it wasn't for that horse, I wouldn't have made it through college. And he turns around and they're not there. And he's like, I have so many questions. So this guy says, I'll shoot you in the calves like Cleveland. And I'm literally like, does he not know that doesn't even make sense? Like, does he not like what is happening? Where is this money coming from that he's paying me to do this job for him? And why is this so bad? And I went home thinking about it. And I was like, this is all falling apart. I'm stressed out. My personal life feels like it's in shambles. I need the most boring job I could possibly find. People keep telling me you're really good in business, but I never took any business classes. I didn't study economics or anything like that. So I'm like, all right, well, what's a business or a finance job that I can get? And that's how I became a part-time teller.
I'm speechless.
Okay, we haven't even gotten to Merrill yet.
So. No, but that's important preamble because I really tried to do something and I had no idea what the macro backdrop of that landscape that I was trying to navigate at the time.
Like just a bank job. You just went and got a bank job.
A part-time teller, like literally 20 hours a week, balance the drawer in this cash. And I was horrible at it. But as I'm going through teller...
The headline here is Matt does bank job badly.
There you go. There's the headline. But as I'm doing that job, I'm going through the training, like I don't know it. Well, I know some of it at the time. So they're flagging me. They're like, oh, this guy has management potential or this guy is this. So I do the part-time teller job for literally 2 weeks. Then they bump me up to like full-time, but they're like, we have to get you on the other side of this counter because I was keeping everybody there for gross amounts of after hours because I could never balance my drawer because ADHD. Why would you put somebody in charge of an activity like that? 8 hours of random hard currency transactions? Like that is a disaster waiting to happen for my brain.
Cannot even imagine giving that to my sweet daughter, loving, amazing ADHD to the max daughter. Cannot.
It was awful. But so then they put me on the other side. And
but she's really great with people. So I'm sure you had a great time talking to people.
So that was the thing. So now they put me in like the lobby And they're like, no, we need you to help people open accounts or whatever else. And I
Yeah.
still know nothing about this, but all I knew was I still kept hearing the whispers of like, oh, maybe there's some management or leadership potential for this person. And I looked at my bank manager and I was like, not only do I not want that job, if that's what my life looks in like he was one of those people who was probably like 32, but in my brain, he's 55.
60. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were 22. So
yeah. You know,
everybody over 30.
Everybody looks older.
Right.
So I look at this guy, I'm like, I don't want your life. I look at the bank branch. There's this other guy who comes in who has the biggest office in the bank branch, and he, you know, dresses well, drives a nice car, doesn't look like he hates his life, which, you know, low bar. Doesn't look like he hates his life. And I'm like, that guy doesn't look like he's miserable every single day. And, you know, spoiler, this is like 2007 in a bank. So it's like, he looks like he's happy. Like, how do I get his job? And they're like, you don't want that job. I was like, I don't want this job. How do I get that job? And so I go talk to him. He tells me what the process is. And that
He's
starts
a financial
my journey
advisor
to becoming a financial advisor.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wealth management. Yeah. You know, it's so interesting. One thing you said earlier, I flagged it in my mind. I'm going to come back to it now. ADHD, I have found in many cases, the thing that moves somebody forward is the thing that pulls you. It's not the thing that pushes you. It's the thing that pulls you. And so you have to kind of keep your eyes up and open and looking and interested. You have to have a curiosity about the world in order to find that thing that pulls you. And I've noticed for the people in my life that when they lose that curiosity, when they feel as though there may not be something out there for them, that's a danger zone. Would you agree with your experience?
100%, because other people will push you, but you're the only one who can actually identify what's pulling you.
Yeah, but you don't like the push.
The other side of ADHD, the extreme focus is if you're not interested in something, it's nearly impossible to spend any time on it.
Yeah.
It's nearly impossible. A lot of people, right? They can do that. They can say, this sucks, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yep.
ADHD people, this sucks and I'm not getting anywhere near it. I don't care if it's an open bag of trash in the middle of the kitchen.
Or high school education.
I won't even see it.
Yeah.
It's 100% true.
Yeah.
So you're right. It has to be a pull.
It has to be a pull.
And so Matt, was when you talked to that guy, did it seem to you this is in my soul, this is in my heart, or it was just like I want a big car and a job that I like?
No, and I didn't even want like a big car or anything. It was just looking at everybody else. There was no self-identifying with anyone in that office.
Got it.
And the only thing that guy had going for him was he looked happy. And the only other people that were happy in that office, and I love them all dearly, were the mostly sweet Jamaican ladies that I worked with, who are all complete, just incredible people in their own right. And they were happy, but they were happy because they understood the station and the role that they wanted to have for the other parts of their life.
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time, how satisfied they were with that stuff. And there was the corporate BS and whatever else, but they were really happy with that role and they weren't trying to do the other stuff. It was the people in the middle of that were trying to reach for something else that were pretty much mostly making themselves miserable or making the people around them miserable because it was all push and they couldn't figure out what their pull was.
So then did you jump to Merrill or did you start in the bank and then head to Merrill? How did all that work? And then talk to us about why you exited Merrill.
All right. So only because I think this is important too for anybody who's, 25 or whatever I was by that point, 25, 26, somewhere in there. So I finally talk to the manager of the financial advisor who's sitting in the branch like 18 times to do this thing. And there were two paths. Again, this is 2006, 7 at this point. Yeah. So the mortgage people are trying to recruit me because I'm doing all this like commercial and bank lending stuff is like becomes a thing that I'm apparently good at, which is just like the complex sales conversation I was good at navigating.
The mortgage market was hot right then.
So they're trying to pull me in.
Yes.
But wonderful woman, Sandy Kanagowski, who was like my mortgage representative that I would work with on this stuff, was like, you don't want to do this right now. She was like, don't come in this direction. If the financial advisor side will take you, go in that direction. Like, you don't want to be here now. Did not understand what she meant by that at all at the time. But good old Sandy definitely like just did that little nudge, and it wasn't a push. It was just a nudge saying like, this is probably not the time to pursue any offer that they put in front of you. So I had to literally, the financial advisor manager was like, also, you don't want this job. Like, you didn't study any of this stuff. You can't even tell me what a stock or bond was, which was true. But he was like, you don't know any of this stuff. You don't want this job. And I was like, yes, I do. I want out of this role and I want into that role. And I had to basically browbeat him for like 6 months until he finally said, I'll let you take the aptitude test. And I used that 6 months to basically pander around, and like, I would listen to NPR and Guy Raz would be like, the Dow was up. And I'm like, what is the Dow? How do you know what this is? How? What does any of this mean? Do people know this? Is this? And then
I was about to say the Dow, DA,
and the Ursula
not the
Bin one.
Dow,
That was the only one I knew. That's the Dow. With that one, because I need Ursula's little notes in the side columns to help explain the thing, so my ADHD can all the way go through that edition. Yeah, my copy of that and my I Ching are back there somewhere on that shelf. So,
just in case you're wondering what he's referencing, it's a really good version of the T Dow, not the D Dow.
There you go. So I have to fight to get into this job. And then I get into this job. But again, I can't stress this enough. I didn't know anything about this business. So I learned enough to basically pass the aptitude test so that I could study for first the Series 7, which I miraculously pass in like, I got like 6 weeks to study and prep and do this thing. And I still don't know how I passed that test, given how little I knew about anything going into the test.
Superpower.
That is right, ADHD at work also, folks.
Now, the other side of that though, and this is, I don't know, because this is the industry, they're like, normally we would give you, I have to take the 66 next. I would give you 3-4 weeks or whatever, however many weeks to take this test. But they're like, we actually need you to take this test in basically 2 weeks. So I go out of taking the 7 to taking the 66, which for me, a much harder test, because it's all these little like logical problems where I'm, like, grew up with an English teacher,
it's
mom, and grandmother.
Series 7 is memorization. Series 66 is problem solving.
And logic. Even if I'm not good at math, I can understand like optionality and the trees and all that crap. Like I can do a T-chart and work my way through it. But the 66 all of a sudden is like, who's the editor here who let this triple negative into this question? Like what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And my ADHD,
out of these 4 good choices and probably correct choices, which one is the right one?
My ADHD brain can't do problems like that, because I just want to, all I'm thinking about is who wrote this test? Who was cruel to them as a child? Like, this is why people go into law degrees and stuff. This is not me. Why are we doing this? So I take the test and I fail by 1 point. And I call the manager. He's like, don't worry. It's totally fine. I told you we were making you take this test way too fast. You're good. Go home, get a nice sleep, come in the morning, and we'll reschedule you. Great. Go home, sleep. I feel stupid, but I also feel like, hey, I got a chance. I go in the next day. He's like, I have to terminate your job. I got to let you go. And by the way, the building that you've been studying, because there's like 2 people in that building, I had to let the other guy too. Since you're still kind of on the clock today for one more day, could you just kind of like sit in that building and make sure nobody comes in? I did not do that, but that was pretty messed up that he said that to me. So I literally go out. I
would give him a hand signal, I do believe.
I was pretty deflated. And again, I'm like, I'm mid-20s here. And I'm like, I thought I had a path and now I don't even have a job. And I gave up the old job, which, probably doesn't even want me back. So I go out, I talk to some people, I do a couple of interviews in the next few weeks. And Merrill is the place that says, we actually have a training program that's still rocking and rolling. They had like 100 people in the training program at that point in the area I was in Hartford. And I was like, you know what? The other people I talked to, which included like an RIA, an insurance type RIA, and some other size firms, I was like, this is the only one that seems to have a training program where the people are being nice to me and it seems like something's going on. So I want to say the beginning of 2008, I sign on to be a Merrill Lynch financial advisor, taken past the 66 on my next pass. And hey, here's your number, young man.
Wow. So, we're going to we're going to stop right here, folks, but we're not done with Matt. He's going to come back because we still haven't figured out how he got from Merrill to Sunpoint, and we haven't even discussed all the cultish creative stuff, which will blow your mind when we talk about it. So I vote, Jess, that we park some more time for this gentleman so we can explore those things.
Well, you don't need me to say this, but one vote is enough. We're 50-50 here, but I'll throw mine in there as well. Cause I mean, absolutely. It's, you know, in this industry, I think the tough thing about finding your way sometimes is that there are a lot of people who've gone through one channel. And I will say maybe 20% of those people have been successful. So if you go through this main channel, there's a more than decent chance that you're not going to make it in this industry.
Well, the 5-year failure rate's right around between 85 and 90% for most firms.
And yet there are people who've gone through these very volatile channels and ended up in a really great spot. And so it makes it really difficult. And the thing that they'll give you, and the advice that they gave me, is that you need to stay true to yourself and figure out your own path through this in order for this to be a good career, good industry for you. And yeah, gosh, that feels so hard and intimidating and difficult to trust yourself when you don't even know who you are, like at 25, or if you've got a lot hanging and depending on you, like I was at 35, with 2 kids and family and husband who's out of work. And like, there's a lot of reasons why it's difficult to find your way through and to make this
and
a
our
good
friend
career.
Matt here got started in the worst market we've seen since 1931.
Absolutely. So yes,
pretty fascinating. That is definitely a topic for another day. Yep. All of that.
Yeah.
So Matt, thank you.
Yeah.
What a conversation.
People need to hear these parts of the story about how much this all can suck at the beginning, how crazy it can be. And hey, we got to the point where I'll tease it for you. Like that 100-ish person training room, that whole giant conference room that was filled within a very short amount of time, that we couldn't fill 2 rows of the conference room. And there was, I think there was 6 of us left. Back to your attrition rate numbers.
Yeah. That's not surprising.
All right, folks.
More on that.
Coming.